Good afternoon. Thank you all very, very much for coming and for joining us today. Whether you're in the room here as part of the university's AI Research Day, and if you were here this morning, you'll know I'll be the one taking chances with the microphone. Or if you are joining us as part of London Climate Action Week online. It's possible that we've got a chat function available online. So if you do have access to that, do feel free to introduce yourselves to each other. And when we have the camera trained on the room, I'll kind of encourage everybody to wave and say hello as well. Okay, my name's there you go. My name is Dom Pates. I'm a educational technologist here at City St George's digital education team. I'm your host for this event, which is titled The Elephant in the Data Center. And I feel a little bit like a cuckoo in the nest there. You join us today for what we hope will be an engaging and thought-provoking debate with a cast of expert speakers and that explores the often overlooked relationship between artificial intelligence and the climate crisis. Two things seem to be clear at the same time. Artificial intelligence, particularly the category known as generative AI, is continuing to have a transformational impact across our world. And this acceleration in AI adoption and usage is also having a significant environmental impact. Outside of the more cutting-edge perspectives presented in today's AI Research Day, from the point of view of a general user of this technology, it can sometimes feel almost impossible that entering a few lines of prompt into a chatbot results in varied and lengthy human-like texts to any imaginable input. Realistic-looking images, videos, even software, working software code in return. And yet, this ever more normalized technical wizardry also masks the vast array of infrastructural layers and pressures on the natural and social worlds that underpin what happens behind a prompt. Environmental concerns around the development and deployment of AI systems are increasingly better understood than the point at which public launch of GPT accelerated wider societal adoption of generative AI. The process of training a large language model is a highly energy-intensive task, even though it typically only happens once. Inference, on the other hand, which is the process of an AI system responding to a prompt input, uses much less energy than model training, but it happens far more frequently. Other environmental considerations around AI usage include the means by which a data center sources energy, the fresh water that is required to run cooling systems for keeping data center servers stable, the mining of rare earth materials required for the hardware that runs on, and the waste implications from upgrade cycles. Now, I think the weather has kind of made our point for us a little bit today as well. So, well done for making it. I hope it's a little bit too cool. Of course, no digital technology is without its environmental footprint. Data centers are already used to power our streaming media and our cloud storage practices. And we also generate e-waste as we move through personal device upgrade cycles. But the scale and the pace of the deployment of generative AI can feel like an order of magnitude greater than the rise of preceding technology curves. So there are, of course, also clear benefits emerging on the other side of the environmental ledger too. And these are ones that we also look into today. We cannot discount the prospect that AI as both tool and agent has considerable promise and is also bringing noticeable benefits to our climate and nature challenges. Today's event features a hybrid panel debate. We have 3 speakers in the room, one online who's joining us from Dublin. And we are hoping that we will have a lively and engaging means of bringing the complex relationship between AI and the climate emergency into sharper focus. It'll be centered around a motion that is probably going to be a little contentious, given our talks this morning. This House believes that AI deployment should be paused due to the environmental risks it currently poses. And we will be inviting you as the audience to cast your vote on this debate motion. From there, the panel will explore, challenge, unpick the motion from different perspectives. We'll draw on their expertise, their viewpoints. And we will close the debate today with a second audience vote. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it. The event is intended to be informative and engaging rather than confrontational and contentious. So I'm thinking more Reithian than Oxford Union. We hope it'll leave you with those of you with different views on the topic with a wider understanding of the range of issues that are involved. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, James Catchpole, who is Director of Executive Education at City Law School, and who is our moderator for the day.
Do I need that one? Thank you, Dom. And of course, welcome to this afternoon's debate. I've got the very short rules of engagement, which I'll run through before I introduce our panel, who are both here and online. We're going to start, as Dom has said, with a poll where you can vote on today's motion. And just as a reminder, this House believes that AI deployment should be paused due to the environmental risk it currently poses. We'll then hear from our speakers. They've got their time in which to speak, and we will be holding them to that time to get through everything they need to do. We'll then run a Q&A using Mentimeter, and you can see the QR code up there to be able to connect up to that. And then we'll wrap up with another poll on the motion to see whether your views have indeed changed during the debate. So if we're able to run that poll to start with, it's that one up there. If I can get you to vote accordingly, please.
Lucky you for starting, Felix. Currently in your favor. Probably reflects that we have an AI interested audience and a sustainability interested audience there, but
I think we're going up and down rather on this one, but we are, at the moment, I would suggest that we are for the resolution itself. Well, no, we're not. We're neck and neck now. It's changing. It's going to be a movable feast for the afternoon. I think we're probably there with that. So we're on a 60, 50, no, 59, more or less neck and neck. It's obviously going to change. So the work of the panels is going to be there. If I can just do very brief introductions, then I will hand over to Felix, who actually is our first speaker for today. Felix is a reader in algorithms at Birkbeck. He's also the director for the Institute of Data Science and director of Birkbeck's Data Science program. Online, who you can't see, who's going to be our... I think this is dying. Who's going with the vote as well. She joins us live from Dublin. Rita is co-founder and director of education at Eblana Learning. She focuses on helping schools ethically embrace AI. Also in the room, we have Sara, She is a reader in computer science at City St George's and a UKRI Future Leader Fellow on the Mosaic Project. And finally, and on the end here, we have Neil, who's a senior lecturer in mathematics here again at City. He is his research is on geometric representation theory, and he enjoys giving outreach talks on mathematics and related areas. I must admit, I'm going to hold my hands up to general ignorance about a lot of what is going to be discussed. So I am probably going to be coming in with some very low-level questions compared to the self for you. So I'm relying on you to help me out here when it comes to those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Felix for his first 5 minutes.
I think I'll go.
You're going up there.
Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, let me set my timer so I stick to the 5 minutes. All right, so I will be arguing for the motion. And in fact, I want to strengthen the motion a little bit, just to make it more fun. I'm very happy that we see like a 50-50 split. That's ideal situations for a debate like this. I want to say we should stop the AI rollout. And what I mean by that, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, AI, I don't mean all AI. I mean the current AI models, the LLMs, the image generation, the video generation, the large scale operations that are happening right now and changing everything. And with rollout, I mean, in particular, the consumer facing rollout. So the thing that pops up everywhere nowadays, whether you're programming something or writing an email or writing a Word document, and asks you to maybe ask AI to do something for you, right? So this kind of integration is what I'm talking about. And as a little example, what I want to argue for is that this is inherently a very wasteful technology. And to give you a little example, let's consider a very simple computational question that you might have in your everyday life. Maybe you want to know what is 13 times 27, right? And you might solve this yourself, good on you. But you also might use any of these gadgets available to you within your vicinity. So maybe a desk calculator or your smartphone or your laptop. And I want to compare the power draw of these devices that you're using to solve this computational task against AI, right? So your solar-powered calculator essentially draws no power, right? It's free. Your smartphone up to 5 watts, but it's running anyway, right? And you typing in those numbers, it doesn't break a sweat. Same for your laptop. When your laptop is idling, it maybe draws 20 watts or something like that. Even if you search on your laptop, if you ask Google to do this for you, right? So you're involving a host of other computers there, like the routers, and then a lot of network stuff is happening. And at some point, a server is preparing the answer to you, sending this all back. Even that adds like maybe 1 watt of power draw overall. That's not a lot compared to what you're drawing anyway. Okay, and the mechanics of this is that these numbers, like 13 and 27, at some point they will be loaded onto the CPU, onto the chip there. It will be instructed to multiply these two numbers. It will do this within a few cycles, and then it spits back the answer, and then the operating system presents it back to you. All right, that's roughly what's happening. Now, if we compare this to AI, it's similar to a Google search, right? So it will be routed through a bunch of things, but we already established that's not the main issue here. But at the back end, you will see one of these things. So this is a NVL72 server rack that NVIDIA produces. This is the big beefy boy. And that contains a bunch of these Blackwell GPUs, 72, in fact. That's where the name comes from. And so what this thing will do is take your query, your text query, it breaks it apart into tokens or words, converts these into numbers, and then starts pulling them through the model. And you can think of the model as something like 100 layers of computation. And every layer of computation is something like 2 billion numbers. And they will have to be multiplied with your input, right? And that happens 100 times. And at that point, the AI doesn't give you the correct answer immediately, but it starts writing the answer, right? So this single operation gives you 1 token, so 1 word roughly. And it says something like, if you multiply 13 and 27, you get such and such. So it has to go through all of these layers for as long as this answer is roughly, okay? Now you can already appreciate that is much more compute that is happening here. And we don't know the exact cost of this because these companies are very cagey about that, but we know a lot about the energy consumption. So this server rack draws around 100 kilowatts up to 150 kilowatts. And to put that into perspective, that's between 50 and 75 electrical ovens running at 200 degrees constantly. Yeah. Okay, you might say, but this thing isn't just answering your query, it's answering a lot of queries, right? There's some kind of parallelism happening. Well, it turns out that the Blackwell GPU can answer or can reply to around 100 users at the same time, maybe 200 users, but that's the order of magnitude. And so this big beefy rack can serve around 7,000 users, maybe 10,000. That sounds a lot, but if you compare this to other technology that we have, for example, serving websites like Wikipedia, you could use a generic laptop to do that, and you could serve between 10,000 and 100,000 people easily, right? At maybe 200 watts. That's when your CPU is doing a lot of work. Now, you might say, but I gave you a very frivolous example of like multiplying two numbers. That's not what AI is for. But if you look at the usage pattern of what people actually use AI for, I would argue most of this is frivolous. Most of this has much better low-powered solutions. And so let me wrap up by saying, I argue that we need to stop the AI rollout because it mostly replaces existing low-energy solutions with high-energy AI compute. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. I'm going to hand over to technology now itself. Rita, are you there? You're mute at the moment.
I am indeed here. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now. If I can
Fantastic.
introduce Rita. Rita is going to be presenting against the motion. So when
I
you're
am
ready.
indeed. I am, and I'd like to thank everybody and also for your tolerance for me being at a distance for very valid environmental reasons. I'd like to speak in the opposite direction to Felix, although I don't disagree with all of his facts. I do disagree with the interpretation of how we can manage them. And I'm speaking from a very specific point of view here in Ireland. I hope most of you are familiar with the location of Ireland being your next door neighbour. And we are suffering from this sustainability challenge intensely. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that for my 5 minutes, mainly to give you what the young people call a lived experience perspective, but also to consider why it is that pausing would be detrimental to resolving some of these clear and present concerns around sustainability. As Dominic mentioned, there is a huge amount of computational energy happening, both in the training and in the inference, where AI chips are servicing this never-ending hunger of humanity, apparently, for distraction and illumination and education and everything else. Where I focus my work is in the AI sustainability within the education sector, but I think we can draw parallels for every instance of AI discernment where we see them. The reason I focus on the energy blindness is because of our location here in Ireland. As many of you might know, for all of my lifetime, for all of my youth, Ireland was an extremely poor country. We were tasked essentially with developing an infrastructure and an industry where we had none, where our main exports were beef and Guinness and bad poetry, if you'll excuse the pun. But essentially what I'd like you to consider now is that Ireland is now a prosperous and increasingly attractive location for these data centers. So much so that when generative AI specifically really caught fire, already a fifth of our energy was being consumed by those data centers. And I think that is really significant when we think about the challenges we already have around energy production and our infrastructure. But it's worse still where I'm speaking to you from today in Dublin, because Dublin has now passed 50% of our energy is being dedicated to those data centers. And as you probably know from data center demand, AI requires constant energy, be it for cooling or for inference. And that energy essentially has to be unbroken. We need to have a consistent supply, which means that if you're in competition with homes and hospitals, the data centers will often win out, because if you know anything about the generous tax laws in Ireland or some of that corporate tax advantage, we are heavily dependent on that. In fact, much of our exchequer takings comes from essentially 6 or 7 companies in Ireland. So if we lose any of those data centers, we'll go backwards. We will regress in terms of our economic prosperity. So whatever they want, not to put too fine a point on it, they will get, because we have grown very accustomed to a nicer standard of living. We like our flat whites and our matcha lattes, thank you very much, and we don't want to lose them. Therefore, when we think about competition around that energy, it is clear that those data center demands will have to be met somehow. It is such an acknowledged truth here in Ireland that our politicians are already talking about how will we be able to pay the fines that are inevitable because we are not going to meet our climate change target goals. Not all of this can be laid at the feet of AI. Of course, some of it is industry, some of it is farming, but it is quite clear that we have accepted that this demand is here, it is growing, and it is here to stay. And I think I'd like to show you a very visual example of this, because what we often don't feel is the weight or the cost of these data center and the increasing AI demands. One data center near my house, not more than a mile and a half away from me, is using the same amount of energy as 200,000 homes. And if I can share a visual with you, that is one of these many, many dots. I don't know if you can see online or in person, Blanchardstown. I'm just north of Blanchardstown, so I'm sitting beneath this massive cluster. And let me tell you, on a week when a new model comes out, such as Fable or Nano Banana, I can feel it. I can feel it in the difficulty getting online. I can feel it in the regular brownouts and blackouts we are now experiencing. For the first time since my childhood, are we having power cuts, which is really interesting, because if there is a dynamic, if there's a location to choose, the data center will be the first to make sure that they get that energy unbroken. So what I'm considering then is that as we think about the demands of the AI, let's take some moderate energy consumer, which is image generation. And again, as I said, on the week when Nano Banana came into force, I could physically almost feel it, the drain on the system that we could experience here. If we compare to 2024, where there were approximately 15 billion images generated using AI, and each of those images, I think we now all accept, that takes about the same amount of energy as 3 charges of your mobile phone. I want you to extrapolate that then for 15 billion images. And that was across the year in 2024. It took us weeks to get to that point in 2025, and it took days, if not hours, to get to that point in 2026. So this acceleration, this incredible rise in demand and consumption, honestly, I think can only be addressed by increased efficiencies. One of my favorite examples that we use with students is that we tell them that a high quality 30-second deepfake video uses the same amount of energy as streaming all the episodes of Friends that in chronological order, and that would be 5,000 times worth of those episodes. When I started using the statistic, it was 5 million times. So that increase in energy is inefficiency is brought about by those very people who consume and demand this energy, the models themselves. So as we see more distillation, as we see more improvement in efficiencies, I think that's why we cannot afford to pause. They are self-motivated, the whole AI sector, to improve these numbers. So that's the point I'll be making today throughout the debate. Thank you so much.
Rita, thank you. The thought of 5,000 series of Friends is just sending shudders through me, but no offense to anybody that's a fan. If I can, I will pass over to Sara now, who is going to speak in favour of the motion.
Hear me? Yep. Hi. So my name's Sara Heitlinger. I'm a reader in computer science and co-director of the Centre for Human-Computer Interaction Design. I'm going to talk in favour of the motion. Is this on a... Okay, so I'm going to start with a quote by the author Cory Doctorow, who said, "The most important thing about a gadget isn't what it does, it's who it does it for and what it does it to." And I'm going to come back to these 2 points throughout the talk. Sorry, it's changing automatically. It doesn't matter. So why do we need to be concerned about this? Because nearly 200 countries have signed up for the Paris Agreement to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees by 2030. So in order to do this, greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced by 43% by 2030 at the latest. And we've got a small window of time in which to achieve this. But 2024 has already broken that record, and I think we can feel today and this week we are already on track to break further records. So, you know, basically we're fucked. We have to recognize that. So what's the problem with AI? As Dom mentioned already, the energy usage is a really big one in tackling those global climate emissions. So data centers electricity usage in 2025 would have ranked 11th globally as a country by its electricity consumption alone. Data centers are set to drive 1/10 of the growth of global electricity demand by 2030, and AI is the main driver of this growth. We also heard a little bit about the problems with water. So AI needs water for cooling, for electricity generation, and for semiconductor manufacturing. The global water footprint for AI could reach up to 6.6 billion cubic meters annually by 2027. Compounding these problems, many of those data centers are located in water-stressed regions already, and by 2030, the water footprint of AI data centers is projected to equal domestic water needs of all 1.3 billion people annually in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have further issues with AI with its environmental impacts. So it's causing mass land degradation issues from the electronic waste it's producing. It'll generate up to 2.5 million tons of e-waste annually by 2030. Low-income countries are bearing the brunt of disposing of this e-waste, but they lack capacity to do that in a safe way. And of course, we have growing demand for critical minerals and the impacts of mining in certain countries, which are also driving social inequalities and impacts such as slavery and things like that. So coming back to the quote from Cory Doctorow, I think we really need to follow the money. Who's funding AI and why? So if we look at the number of billionaires that have been created through the AI explosion recently, we can see that there are 50 new billionaires, AI billionaires created in the last year alone. And AI is creating new billionaires at a record pace. Well, you might say, you know, what's the problem with that? That's all great. Billionaires are great. We're all experiencing the trickle-down benefits of more billionaires. But it is a problem because billionaires disproportionately drive climate issues and extremes and the climate crisis. And the AI boom is only set to increase those impacts of people with money. So they are basically, it is a huge disproportion between the contributions of the extreme wealth and the extreme wealthy across the planet and the impacts that they're causing through their lifestyles. So the business model of AI is the problem. It's the business model that is driving the environmental cost of AI. The impacts are felt unequally across the planet, both the benefits and the negative impacts. It is causing unequal impacts for justice and sustainability. And so until we can solve that, this House, I believe that AI deployment should be paused due to these risks that it currently poses. And I'm at time. So I'm just going to say one thing. Please come to our HCID conference on the 23rd of September, where we will be talking about issues such as this at City here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I call upon our last speaker, Neil, who is going to present again against the motion.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I don't have slides, so I'll just bellow. Thank you very much for coming after the long lunch and for staying awake. So to bring this motion, just a bit of clarity here, I want to be clear about what we're not arguing on this side of the house. We're not arguing that there's no carbon footprint of AI and these things are not ravaging the natural environment. This side of the house is happy. Well, I'm not terribly happy to agree that the stats like the cloud, the computing cloud, has more carbon footprint than the airline industry is probably true. That 2/3 of the data centers built since 2022 are in water-stressed areas, and that Google's climate emissions or energy consumption mirrors that of my colleague Rita's homeland of Ireland. So we're not seeking to cast doubt over any of that, and nor are we agreeing with people like Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, who says that he'd bet on AI solving the climate crisis because the net zero targets and the green energy strategies won't get there anyway. We're not adherents of the techno-solutionism that people like him are. But the reality of the situation is that AI is already here, and it's so deeply lodged in our workflows, in governments, in medicine, in research, in science, in education, that to have a pause on its deployment is something that's neither feasible nor workable. It'd be a bit like the debates you remember when it was talked about how much the British owe India for the ravages of the East India Company. Shashi Tharoor said any sum that is payable is not credible, and any sum that is credible is not payable. So we do have to be realistic here. And also remember that AI is fundamentally a commercially driven technology, and we are in the midst of an AI arms race, meaning that companies are striving their best to get the best LLMs, the best AI digital assistants. And so any possible pause on AI development or deployment would be, as I said, more honored in the breach than the observance by these AI companies. Then, of course, what sort of AI are we talking about? Now, I agree with much of what Felix said, but the motion before us is the deployment of AI should be stopped, not the deployment of the consumer-facing AI, but all AI. Now, we've seen from other colleagues today the brilliant work that's been done in AI, such as medical imaging, such as detecting cancers early on, such as the research for developments of new cancer treatments. These are very important AIs that are not LLMs. So these particular AIs will be very targeted to do a very specific thing. They're not the thing that's going to take a photo of your fridge and give you a recipe afterwards. We don't need those sort of AIs. So we need to be very careful and very granular about what sort of AIs we're actually discussing. These are not large language models, but certain AIs to do certain benefits for the good are, I would argue, necessary. So what could we possibly do? Well, Sasha Lucioni and Emma Struebel wrote one of the early papers on the carbon footprint of natural language processes as they were back then, wrote a wonderful paper called in Nature called Light Bulbs Have an Energy Rating, Why Don't AI Chatbots? And if that consumer behavior was there, that would incentivize AI developers and the like to put things like the carbon footprint and the environmental concerns as a parameter in their efficiency models. Greater transparency in this domain would allow these industries to be more transparent about their AI footprint. Also, the wonderful book by Alex Hanna and Emily Bender called The AI Con remind us that we as consumers have the power to say no to this technology. And also the law in economics that says there are no sellers if there are no buyers. So we have the choice to not pay those huge subscription fees and to not use that technology if we want to. Now, there are some smaller models out there. We might come to the Q&A, but there are some brilliant research done at the moment, like distillation and quantization, that takes a large language model, prunes the parameters very well and efficiently so that you can have those systems running on your device, on your laptop. You won't require the big cloud to use them. So there's a lot of research and deployment of those systems, I would argue, that is what's needed in the future. So I think I'm at time, but just to wrap up. So any deployment, any ban or pause on deployment would not be credible nor feasible. And we as consumers have more power than we think. And if we're really concerned about the AI footprint, we should probably witness our behavior to it more forcibly than we do at the moment. Thank you very much.
I think we've heard a very wide-ranging selection of views here, everything from the economic impact that AI is having, both the benefits and cons of that as well. We've also sort of recognition that there is climate impact as well, and actually AI could be a driver behind that. Phrase for arms race has also been used. One of the things that struck me is whether or not this is indeed a modern day industrial revolution that's going on and what is happening as a result of that. Rather than me ask a question, I'd much rather throw this out to you, the audience. We've got people online. If I could ask you to put them in the chat, we will try and pick you up as well in that regard. Is there anybody to start? Go for it.
was there. I watched James Bond since I was a child, but I never thought it possible, and we have it in our hands these days, right? So we as humans, we know what to use, when to use, how many people to use. Why are we not exercising that instead of stopping it completely? Only govern it, control it, so that only for legitimate purposes it is accessed. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. I think you're arguing for some environment to regulate laws. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I don't want to pick up a point that Neil made. Essentially, I don't will not misrepresent you argue for personal responsibility, make these things more transparent, which is probably very helpful. And you mentioned the carbon footprint, and I think this is a really good example of, I think, what doesn't work. The carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum as a way of putting the responsibility of climate change onto consumers and saying, now you know, this is transparent, now you can act. That hasn't worked, has it? Like, the notion of carbon footprint is over 25 years old now, and our carbon emissions have still soared. So I think it has to be some kind of democratic regulation and not this kind of consumer trying to convince the consumer, please don't use AI as much. Maybe the second point there, a lot of the AI usage nowadays is top down. A lot of the AI usage, I would estimate roughly half, is demanded from upper management to workers. And it's not the people themselves who want to use AI necessarily. There are some of those clearly, but a lot of it is top down. So it's not organic. Yeah. You want to go next? Or do you want to?
No, I think that's an excellent point about the carbon footprint of the move that the big companies made to put it back on you. But you still have the power to say no and not use these devices. And I think one of the points in the Emily Bender and Alex Hanna book was that a great lot of the hype around the use of AI comes from FOMO, right? If you don't use it, you're going to be less competitive than your graduate or your colleagues at other universities. And that goes from the top and it goes all the way through management, all the way down. But my wife teaches creative writing at another institution, and their managers said, well, you should use it as well to write your scripts and create your scripts. I mean, what a nightmare that sounds like. But the students themselves said, we actually do not want to use this for our creative tasks. What a world it would be where we're using these things to write the things that make us human, our stories, our music, our art. And so you're already seeing the green shoots of resistance of this FOMO agenda. So I think there's still more reason to be optimistic that people are taking their personal responsibilities more seriously.
I'm conscious we also have Rita online as well. Rita, do shout when you want to join in.
I would love to add something to that, but also to answer a question which has come up in the chat, which is essentially the whole paradoxical nature of this deployment, right? The fact that we all agree that there is a sustainability concern. We all agree that there are benefits and cons to this technology. And where we differ is the speed of adoption, the level of agency that people have around this, I guess, and the motivations of these companies to get us highly addicted, to impose their will upon us, whatever those motivations might be, to genuinely unlock personalized vaccines and an abundant future, all of those possible futures that lie ahead of us. I think what I'd like to bring to it is that we have had a roadmap for this before. We've experienced a high degree of addiction and consumption around plastic. We have a very clear understanding now of what conscious consumption looks like. And I agree when Neil said about the pushback that we see already happening. I hear this in schools all the time. Students who really hate the impact that AI is having on the world in a variety of ways: creativity, AI slop, the environmental considerations, the personalization, the connection, belonging, the embodied learning. All of these things are starting to bubble up. And I think to pause the deployment now would be that we are stymieing what development that we are prizing in here. We need much more regulation, I suppose, on one side, but more importantly, agentic development and understanding. When people understand the environmental cost of individual prompts and texts and images and videos, and then the world models, if we start to escalate and extrapolate, people are genuinely very receptive to these statistics, these equivalences, so that they can make much more informed decisions. And we have a frame of reduce, reuse, recycle. That's perhaps what we need to apply here in terms of, rather than restricting and trying to stop the genie again out of the bottle, then that we can use some of these lessons from the past to better deploy rather than to ban or prevent or try and achieve the impossible.
I can't actually read the question that's up on screen. I said, well, should we go for gentleman here? Would you like
Yeah,
to pose your question?
Yeah, my name is Dimitris. You notice. Yeah, in parallel to what we heard about potential regulatory interventions or personal responsibility, I think, and given that we are in a university, one could think about training, right? And the same way we are thinking about how to train the students to use AI in a useful manner, avoid any pit. We could think about training, society to a larger, extent, and that, in a sense, has happened before. And whenever there was a new technological invention, right? Take a car, you need to know how to drive the car. You need to be educated for a proper use. And I don't see why all these fancy new technologies are very different. So what I'm saying is there is a role perhaps universities could play with regard to educating people, training people for a good use, as opposed to appealing to personal responsibility. I think it has to be more centrally, mandated, more centrally organized. Don't know what things.
Would like to go first, Sarah?
I just don't think that we have time to rely on education of individuals. We're in a crisis. It's a climate crisis. The thresholds are being breached. We live on a finite planet, and we are not all billionaires that can go live on the moon and in outer space. So, we live on an amazing planet, and we need to stay here and figure out how we live on this planet. And I don't think it's fair or reasonable or feasible to put that responsibility on individuals and on educators. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean.
Yep. I want to address something that also ties in with what Rita essentially recommended in her argument, and that was to let the AI companies continue their rollout and let them make progress in developing better models, doing distillations, all of these things. I think one of the key issues there is that these companies have no incentive of becoming more energy efficient. One of the big selling points of these companies at the moment is that they're the only ones who can deploy and train these models, right? They're the only ones who have the resources to do that. So they don't want to have smaller models that are similarly capable, hence why there was a big shock when DeepSeek came out with a model that was comparable to then frontier models. So these companies by themselves will not become more energy efficient. If anything, they want to create a new type of consumer who uses AI constantly, religiously. And you see that when you speak to the chatbots, that they will try all kinds of psychological tricks on you, right? They comment you on your nice question. They tell you that your ideas are great, all of these things, and they're there to engage you. Or if you ask the AI a question, it will, at the end, give you kind of a follow-up prompt and say like, oh, have you also thought about this? It's to keep you in the loop, to keep you engaged, because the only way in which these companies at some point might become profitable is if enough people are hooked onto these machines to the point where they can up the prices to the point where they actually make a profit. Right now, they're losing money left, right, and center. And so this formation of this new type of consumer is very much their agenda. And that goes against any type of energy preservation, energy conservation you want to do.
Can I gently push back on that and add a rebuttal, which is that I absolutely agree. I think their primary focus is obviously to increase their market share, to increase addiction dependency, to integrate into workflows, however we want to, consciously consider what their motivations are. However, I think the speed at which we saw a culture of token maxing, to try and get ahead, to deploy this as quickly as possible, that as the supply and demand really hits home, I think that they are genuinely very motivated for commercial and selfish reasons to improve efficiencies, to get the fastest, lightest models, to dominate the market, whatever it might be. I see now that token efficiency is so much more discussed, and that the understanding of the limitations of the energy resources, that they simply cannot ever meet the demand currently. I think that is actually a motivational factor. I think that they are truly, conscious. I mean, if we're now talking about reopening nuclear power plants, if we're talking about data centers in space, I think that there is a generally acknowledged sense now in the industry that they do need faster, better, lighter, cheaper models, and that efficiency is a main driver for many of these companies. I agree, it is not the only driver. They also want addiction, they also want dependency, they also want full integration into everybody's work stream. And part of that model, I guess, that loss leader consumption is factored in. But at the moment, the people bearing the cost of this electricity is the power companies. It is that sector. It is not us as users, until we start to hit up against token limits and credit limits. And then we really do genuinely have to feel the cost of this. And that is happening in the industry already. So I think that's really important, that we consider that it is, yes, addiction consumption is their primary target. However, it is not their only consideration. And I think that's why DeepSeek was so revelatory, to show that it could be done faster, cheaper, better, and that remains the motivation of the sector currently.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of time, so I suggest we take one more question in the room, and then we have a look very quickly at questions online as well, and then we'll go to closing submissions.
Thank you for your presentations. My name is Alberto. I'm a professor emeritus in computer science in Federal University of Espírito Santo in Brazil. And I'd like to, before making the question, argue against some of the points that the panel made. I start with water. There are plenty of solutions for those immense data centers not to consume water. You can make closed cycle refrigeration and using air. It's already starting. It's just a question of capitalism. And if you allow them to have all the money that they can get, they will use water. But if you say you cannot use water, there are solutions without water. And energy, our sun is a nuclear fusion reactor, and we, as has been proposed, we can put all these data centers in space, in orbit around the Earth, that always point to the sun. It can use energy there and dissipate the heat there as well, not increase the heat in our planet. Of course, it is hard to make, but there are the incentives, and you can, as a society, help these as well. Of course, one can say that those ships that are going to put those things in there may use methane, for example, but we can ask them to not use that, use hydrogen and oxygen, and then produce water as a byproduct. So there are solutions for everything, and all those solutions will push the humanity ahead, in my point of view, providing better technologies, solving the energy problems that we already have for other reasons. For example, there is a company in Britain called First Light that's trying to make a fusion reactor that will provide clean energy as opposed to the standard nuclear reactor that we use today. So my question is shouldn't we, instead of say, ask those companies or those efforts to pause, shouldn't we ask them to go ahead, but taking these considerations in improving not only AI, but other areas like energy consumption, like water consumption, like a better earth without warming?
If I can ask the panel to be quick in their response so we can get to a couple of lines, that'd be lovely. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, if I want to make it brief, do you remember the Hyperloop? This was the thing from 12 years ago. Elon Musk proposed that we built this new railway system with vacuum tubes and whatnot, rehashing old ideas that were existing already. And that went nowhere, right? But there was a lot of hype around this. And I think the purpose in hindsight of this technological fiction was to prevent progress of building the California highest speed railway line. So Elon Musk put forward technological fiction in favor of a real existing technology. And I think we're seeing the same thing again with nuclear fusion, with data centers in space. These are fictions. Some of these things might work at some point in a few decades. Whether they work out in the way that it's presented now is anyone's guess, but I would say probably no. Like, I think the problems that data centers pose right now cannot be solved with these types of fictions. We know what kind of technology we need to do that. We need build out of of green energy and so on. So I think the answer is not more technology, but pausing development and actually implementing the development, implementing that we have already to a point where we can mitigate these things. Yeah.
Neil, you look like you.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that you put these things in space, I mean, the whole point about the Space Treaty of 1967 was to not put nuclear weapons in space. That Space Treaty is going to be coming to an end. The whole point about the Antarctic Treaty was to say that Antarctica doesn't belong to anyone and the natural resources can be left there. I see great danger that the competition for minerals and resources in space and on the moon will, potentiate wars and conflicts down here. So I don't think it can be left to the AI companies to be doing this. But I do think there are many other mechanisms by which you can hold them accountable. Just to the previous question, getting students to know where the holes in the AI system are before they use it, almost like having a license to drive before you get behind a wheel. There's so many things that you could do there.
Thank you. I've been handed a couple of questions off. Those have posted them up online. As a regulator, I'm going to come in with one that I would be quite interested in your views on, which is, should big tech be forced to be more ethical and environmental, i.e. regulation?
Yes.
Yes.
Rita, Neil?
Shall I go? Yeah,
Go
I
on.
would say absolutely. I think all levers have to be used and applied. I think if regulation were effective, then we should be doing more of it. But again, I think also the fact that all of the considerations, all of the concerns are shared, if not expressed. I think the point I'd like to make before we finish is that I have been tracking a huge amount of kind of climate change denial language in the AI sector. People talking about, if you think this is bad, you should see golf, or if you think this water consumption is bad, you should look at what burgers actually do to the environment. I think an honest expression of this is an additive burden. We already had a climate crisis. This is now adding to it, and that deployment has now kind of reached such momentum that I think pausing it would be impossible. The idea that abstinence has ever worked in any kind of educational context is laughable. So I think to apply it here would be a bit of a fool's errand. I think for us, regulation plus education plus consumption restriction plus all of those things are part of the solution. No one single lever is going to work in isolation.
I'm going to wrap it up there, if you're okay with that. I'm going to give the panelists 1 minute each for their final pitch. Then I will turn it over to you to vote. So, Felix, if I can invite you to go first.
Okay, so if I have to keep it brief, I want to argue that our actual power is in democratic participation and not as consumers. So I think we need to use the levers that we have, that politicians have kind of forgotten about conveniently in the last 20 years. Regulation is seen as this thing that we did in the past, but we're not doing it anymore because the big technology brought us benefits. I think that time is over, and I think politicians have to rediscover that they can exert power, and quite meaningful power. And Rita, to the point of that regulation doesn't work, we don't have to allow Blackwells to be deployed in a country. right? We can say you can have all kinds of other servers and deploy regular software. We can forbid the deployment of the software. That would absolutely be possible. And since it's so difficult to deploy it by yourself, unless you have a few millions lying around and a good connection to the power grid, I think at this point we can absolutely do that. Thank you.
Over to you, Rita.
Thank you. I think in the last minute, sorry, I was just being asked by an 11-year-old if she can go on her phone. So if we needed a better example of the addictive nature of these technologies, I think we just had it as an interruption. The final plea that I would make is that I absolutely agree with what Felix just said. I would push back again. I don't believe that regulation on its own is impossible. I think it is part of a much more nuanced offering that we need to present to ourselves, to the AI technology sector. I think it needs to be a collaborative effort, because pausing the deployment is, I think we probably all believe deep down, pausing it is now virtually impossible. We need to be much more realistic, more mature, more nuanced in our approach. I don't want to paint Ireland as a sacrifice zone, but I think it is a message from the future. I think what we experience here in Dublin will start to manifest in New Orleans and Colombia and Mexico and the Netherlands and all these other places where data centers are growing, and exponentially so. I think what I would like to suggest is that pausing the development is impossible. Pausing the deployment would be destructive. That increasing the motivation for the individual consumer, as well as the AI deployers, as well as the AI developers, that is where we need to focus our attention. Because paradoxically, the solution to this climate crisis, to the energy demands, might be AI itself. It might also not be, but it warrants investigation, and it warrants us to develop that more maturely and considerately. And while we do that, the only effective change we've ever had in face of climate change has been individual personal decisions and conscious consumption. So we need to continue that and not give in to apathy or atrophy or any of those kind of negative temptations in the face of this global crisis.
Yeah, just following on that, I think we need to strengthen our democratic levers, because the AI infrastructure is going to be more and more intervening in those. And I think we need to avoid dangers of techno-solutionism that have been raised here, and recognize that, that we are like at a critical point, both for social and environmental injustices, and we need to be conscious of how impacts and benefits are being felt unevenly across the globe. And just finally, to understand that we are, as individuals, we are the product, and we are benefiting a small number of people on the planet. Like, we are the product. So, it's a bit of a skewed system.
I'll try this. It's far too much agreement on this panel. There's a law that's at work here that A.C. Grayling put it out in his book For the Good of the World, that anything that can be done will be done if it confers benefit on people who can see it be done. And so big tech companies are incentivized to develop their AI systems. But they're looking back through history, there are mechanisms by which you can bring these companies to account. Just as 80% of the internet traffic is pornography, so too is much of the AI used for deepfakes and creating counterfeit people. We should make it a law not to counterfeit a human being online, and impose big penalties for that if they're caught. This might sound pie in the sky, but it's done with counterfeit money already. Dan Dennett wrote a great essay where he showed us that it was possible not to photocopy a legal tender. And if you're caught doing it, you lose your reputation and you have severe economic consequences. These sort of mechanisms have not been tried yet, and they're very urgent, and they'll be more practical and feasible than an outright ban or a pause on deployment.
Thank you. And thank you, panel, for everything you put forward. Before we say thank you more widely to our panel, I'm going to invite you now to recast your vote on light of what you've been listening to. So let's see what happens. Are we safe to declare, do you think?
No, we're still going.
possible for he called that.
Anybody online, quickly vote.
These are AI bots, these last ones.
Oh, somebody's just joined us. It's the number of people joining that's increasing faster than the votes. I'm happy to declare very, very marginally, I'm going to say that the House is going to pass the motion. I think the result of this is that the debate is still going to be divided for quite a while. And thank you, panelists, for everything you've done. I think as we keep going, it looks like you might just about to win the next election. But in the interim, can I ask everybody to express their thanks to the panelists? Thank you.